Greetings, my friends. Brother Joey here, and I wanted to do a special Signs of the Times report talking about the historic collapse, the catastrophic fisheries collapse being reported in the Pacific Ocean post-Fukushima. And obviously, even the experts are saying that this has a lot to do with the effects of Fukushima, which is, of course, still affecting the entire planet in many ways, even though the mainstream media will not report on it. However, I want to share with you a few things. I'll link you up to the reports in the description box below. But these are all recent reports that have come out. And, we know that after the opening of the seventh seal in Revelation 8, verse 9, it's prophesied that 1/3 of all sea life on earth dies. And Revelation 8:9 says, "And then the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed." Now, I believe we're a long way away from that. Or not a long way, but what I'm reporting on in this video is not a fulfillment of that prophecy, but rather more foreshadowing. The Fukushima and its impacts on the Pacific Ocean as a whole, certainly are laying groundwork, foreshadowing the fulfillment of this end-time Bible prophecy. And so let's get into some of these reports here. In this first piece, which also has links to many other reports from different news agencies linked up in it, so I'll link you up with that, and it's even got a live KTVA television broadcast on the matter linked up as well. But it talks about how following last year's massive die-off of Alaskan seabirds, scientists are still looking for answers geographically, and that it lasted a year. That's unprecedented, according to Kathy Coolitz, a biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's certainly well over 100,000, and it could go many times that. I would say possibly hundreds of thousands were killed. Almost always it's been starvation. Seabirds are top predators. Heather Renner, a biologist with the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge, said, and she goes on to say they're sort of sentinels for our environment. And they have definitely let us know that there's a change going on in the ocean ecosystem, Renner says. The birds had an exceptionally low birthing season. This reproductive die-off meant a total failure of murre reproduction that year. The reproductive die-off is something we've never seen in murres before. It's widespread, she says. The refuge has been monitoring these colonies for 4 decades. So 40 years of monitoring, and it's like nothing they've ever observed before, Renner said. And then it's another report here from AP says that tens of thousands of common murres starved and washed ashore on beaches from California to Alaska. And it's because there's no fish out there anywhere over a very large area, said John Pyatt, a biologist for the U.S. Geological Survey. To see such effect over 2 sizable marine ecosystems is extraordinary, he said. Common murres eat small forage fish, which were largely absent when the National Marine Fisheries Service conducted surveys, even as far back as summer of 2015. A conservative extrapolation indicates that 500,000 or more common murres died, Pyatt said. Nearly all were emaciated. And there's a quote here that says, in 2016, we had widespread breeding failure at all of the colonies in the Gulf of Alaska as well as the Bering Sea, Renner said. It was a highly unusual event. Murres don't fail regularly. They died of starvation because there was no food, Pyatt goes on to say. He says there was no food because there was no fish. And then in another report linked up here, it says the birds were underweight to the point of starvation, Shannon Atkinson of the University of Alaska Fairbanks said. The number of starved murres and the length of their die-off was something no one had seen before. But murres in the Gulf of Alaska were not only seabirds, were not the only seabirds to die in large numbers last year. Tufted puffins in the Bering Sea also showed up on beaches in massive numbers. Scientists struggle to understand why a bird that spends most of the winter offshore eating fish would fly to the coast to die of starvation on the beach. And according to research, they found a link between the starving birds and trawl surveys that came up empty, or with only a few of the forage fish normally eaten by murres. It says here, in a quote from Atkinson, the main result to take away from this is the catch per unit effort for all of those species was very close to zero, meaning that the forage fish was simply not there, Atkinson says. And it links up a report from KUCB talking about how in the past 2 months, 300 dead puffins have washed up on St. Paul Island, alarming residents who had only seen 6 carcasses over the last decade. Scientists say it could be the sign of a much larger ecosystem problem, according to the co-director of St. Paul's Ecosystem Conservation Office. And he said in a quote, "There are dead puffins everywhere. The carcasses came ashore in waves," according to Lauren Devine, the co-director of St. Paul's Ecosystem Conservation Office. She said the extent of the die-off was frightening. And after we opened up the first 5, it was very apparent that all of them were emaciated, she said. Their muscles were completely atrophied, and they had empty stomachs. They had gastrointestinal bleeding, which indicates severe long-term starvation. They were in very, very poor shape. So we started digging into this more, said the biologist. And she goes on to say, what is happening? Where is their food? The Eco Office is also seeing signs of stress in other species, according to reports. And she said that the island's seabirds laid barely any eggs this season. Hunters had a hard time finding sea lions, and crab quotas were cut sharply after a survey showed unprecedented low numbers. Then a few days later, this report came out, and again, this is another report from E&E News, and it's got several reports and articles and television news coverage linked up here in the piece. So if you want to check it out and verify everything, you can go and check out all these sources yourself and see for yourself. And this is so biblical, my friends. So I don't want to drag this video on too long, but I want to cover some of these facts here that show more signs of the times. And I mean, I've talked frequently in other videos on the end time mass animal die-offs prophesied by Hosea in Hosea 4:3, and also in Zephaniah chapter 1. And I'll probably do a video on the worldwide die-offs right after this one. But I want to focus just on the Pacific Ocean here, just for a couple minutes. And so this piece here, again, linked up with many reports within it, talks about how hundreds of millions of Pacific salmon are missing and presumed dead. The Japanese government has issued an emergency order. The U.S. government, not the Japanese government, has issued an emergency order along the United States West Coast, and even over in Japan. They're suffering historic collapse. Fish are starving to death, as we've seen in the previous reports. And it says here that all forms of ocean life appear to be dying in stunning numbers across the entire Pacific Ocean. And it talks about here how the low salmon run size for the Yuba River appears to be part of another regional salmon collapse. And this is a report from the South Yuba River Citizens League. And the California Department of Fish and Wildlife point to preliminary data from the Sacramento River that indicates salmon runs have also dropped to record low levels. According to Dan Bacher's reporting, last year's salmon run on the Klamath River was a 38-year low. Gary Reedy, SYRCL's consulting salmon expert, reports that a new crash for the Central Valley Chinook salmon is not expected. However, what's going on seems to indicate otherwise. And they're talking about record low levels, and it goes on here to talk about how the worst Klamath Chinook run on record is forecasted from the Oregonian. And it says here, the worst run forecast on record for the Klamath River's Chinook salmon could close all salmon fishing along most of the Oregon coast this coming summer. Wow. And then it goes on here in a piece from the Mendocino Beacon, and it says here, returns of sprawling Klamath River fall Chinook are projected to be the lowest on record in 2017. The salmon runs this year will present a challenge for ocean fishermen and managers throughout the West Coast, said Executive Director Chuck Tracy. The low forecast, he says, for the Klamath River fall Chinook is unprecedented. This year will be an exceptionally difficult year for ocean salmon fisheries, especially in Oregon and California, said Council Chair Herb Pollard. And then it links up a few other reports here talking about spring king fishing has been canceled by an emergency government order. And it says here the Juneau area will be closed off for king salmon fishing. Biologists expect a second straight year of record low king salmon returns on the Taku River. And in a quote here from Juneau area management biologist Daniel Teskey, he said, we've been in a period of low productivity, not just on the Taku, but on several rivers up and down the coast. And he said, nobody knows exactly why southeast king salmon are struggling, but biologists do know where the fish are being affected: in the ocean. The increased die-off must be happening in a marine environment, Teskey said. Otherwise, numbers on all four rivers wouldn't fall all at the same time. Then it goes on here to talk about how Japanese salmon fisheries are also in a historic collapse. And it mentions here that landings in Hokkaido, Japan are the lowest in nearly 3 decades, reports the blog RussGeorge.net. The volume of salmon caught at main fishing ports, including Hokkaido, plunged 30 to 40% in 2016 from the previous year, and the figure represented the lowest level in over 28 years. The collapse has been confidently attributed to the starvation of 4-year-old chum salmon. And again, we're seeing fish being starved, and we're seeing a complete fishery collapse there in the Pacific Ocean. And then in another report here it says, Japan salmon fisheries in historic collapse. News from Japan is terrible for Northwest Pacific fish. Local fishermen have been increasingly concerned over the fact that the trend of meager catch that continued in recent years has not been held in check and is indeed worsening every year. Given the shortfall of fish and the scrawny condition of the fish that were caught, all evidence points to a cataclysmic collapse of ocean pasture, primary productivity, and fish starving at sea. Across the Pacific Ocean, salmon pastures have failed, they say in the report here. Japan chum salmon landings are the worst in 24 years. In another news headline that's linked up here, and it says this year's chum catch in Japan is very poor, with declines in landings not only in the Hokkaido region, but also in Honshu. Also, chum sizes are getting much smaller. In another piece from Russ George, it talks about hundreds of millions of Pacific salmon are missing and presumed dead. It says across 10,000 miles of northern Pacific Ocean pasture, there are declarations from Japan and the United States that are reporting a cataclysmic collapse of Pacific salmon. The fish are tragically starving at sea as the plankton pastures have turned into clear blue, lifeless deserts. The collapse of the North Pacific Ocean fish pastures have resulted in near total collapse of Pacific salmon. It's not just Pacific salmon that are dying in the North Pacific. All forms of ocean life are being reported dead and dying in stunning, unprecedented numbers. That's, again, reiterated in another report here. And then from Japan News Agency, from the Hokkaido Shinbun, it says here, salmon landings in Hokkaido in 2016 are the lowest in 3 decades. The number of salmon caught in Hokkaido in 2016 plunged 30% from the previous year. The figure represented the lowest level in over 28 years. Local fishermen have been increasingly concerned over the apparently catastrophic die-off, and the harvest in Hokkaido was the worst in multiple decades, as the reports indicated, and the number of returning 4-year-olds, which are regarded as the main shoal, was also a record low. And in this last piece here from Energy News that I'll link you up with as well, which also has 5-6 more reports from different news agencies in the affected areas, and of course more links to more television news broadcast coverage. And it talks about here, as we see in the headline, the most catastrophic fisheries collapse in history expected along the West Coast. And that's according to official, and he says that this is a nightmare. I have never in my life dreamed that it would get this bad, or it could get this bad. The threat of coast-wide fishing failure is a reality. And it goes on to say here, in a Yurok tribe press release that's linked up here in the piece, it says the Yurok tribe is bracing for the far-reaching economic, cultural, and social challenges created by what is expected to be the most catastrophic fisheries collapse in the Klamath River's history. The number of fall Chinook salmon predicted to return is the lowest on record. This unprecedented fisheries crash will have real consequences for the Yurok people. This is a nightmare, in the quote, as I previously read, and this man, Thomas P. O'Rourke, who is the senior chairman of the Yurok tribe, said he's never seen in his life this occurring, and he's never even dreamed that it could get this bad. And the bleak 2017 forecast is linked to a 3-punch combination, apparently, comprised of 2 straight years of extremely elevated juvenile fish disease levels, diminished river conditions, and poor ocean health. We are in crisis mode. This is the most terrible fisheries disaster in history, said Chairman O'Rourke. And it goes on here to talk about how the Yurok tribe announced that they are preparing for what they are calling the most catastrophic fisheries collapse in the Klamath River's history. And it again goes on to talk about how the salmon runs are experiencing a crash with these record low runs forecasted. The commercial and recreational ocean Chinook salmon fishing seasons in the Klamath Management Zone from southern Oregon to north of Shelter Cove will be closed this season as a result of this. And ocean salmon abundance is expected to be so low this year that the Pacific Fishery Management Council is considering a statewide closure of the commercial Chinook salmon season. And a press release stated that drought, disease, poor ocean conditions, and other issues are expected to reduce Klamath River Chinook salmon returns to record low levels. And according to Mike Berner, the PFMC's deputy director, he said, and his exact words are, "We are in unprecedented territory," end quote. Scientists believe that the numbers of adult Chinook salmon in the ocean this year are so low that the recreational and commercial fishing seasons up and down the California coast will be drastically reduced. And from the Oregon Public Broadcasting Corporation, there was a report released that's linked up here, and it says that the West Coast is on track for a meager and potentially disastrous salmon season, according to Butch Smith, who chairs an advisory panel that helps the Pacific Fishery Management Council set salmon seasons. And this year may end up being considered a coast-wide fishing failure. So there you have it, my friends. It's prophesied, of course, in Hosea 4:3, it says, "Therefore shall the land mourn, and everyone that dwelleth therein shall languish with the beasts of the field, with the fowls of heaven, yea, the fishes of the sea also shall be taken away." And then in Zephaniah 1, verses 2 and 3, it says, "I will utterly consume all things from off the land, saith the Lord. I will consume man and beast. I will consume the fowls of heaven, and the fish of the sea, and the stumbling blocks of the wicked, and I will cut off man from the land, saith the Lord." And of course we know that you get further along in the end time prophetic scriptures, and it's like I mentioned earlier in the video, we know that after the opening of the seventh seal, in Revelation 8 verse 9, it's prophesied that 1/3 of all sea life on earth dies. And of course, with tragic events, like Fukushima, certainly contribute to foreshadowing and playing a key role in the progression towards the fulfillment of these end-time prophecies. So I'll link you guys up at those pieces in the description box below as usual. But there you have it, my friends. We're seeing historic fisheries collapse as all forms of ocean life are dying in unprecedented numbers across the Pacific Ocean. And no doubt the main cause of it all is the post-Fukushima effects of radiation. There are reports that just come out today talking about how melted fuel is still leaking from one of the reactors, and of course many other reports, and we'll be touching on that in videos to come, keeping an eye on it as these signs of the times continue to unfold, my friends. So I'll leave you with that. This is Brother Joey signing off. God bless you guys, and I pray that you've repented of your sins, that you're right with God, and that you've turned to Jesus Christ and put your faith in Him, and that you're born again by the Holy Spirit. God bless, guys. For answers, geographically, and that it lasted a year, that's unprecedented, according to Kathy Coolitz, a biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's certainly well over 100,000, and it could go many times that. I would say possibly hundreds of thousands were killed. Almost always it's been starvation. Seabirds are top predators. Heather Renner, a biologist with... Greetings, my friends. Brother Joey here, and I wanted to do a special Signs of the Times report talking about the historic collapse, the catastrophic fisheries collapse being reported in the Pacific Ocean post-Fukushima. And obviously, even the experts are saying that this has a lot to do with the effects of Fukushima, which is, of course, still affecting the entire planet in many ways, even though died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Now, I believe we're a long way away from that, or not a long way, but what I'm reporting on in this video is not a fulfillment of that prophecy, but rather more foreshadowing. The Fukushima and its impacts on the Pacific Ocean as a whole, certainly are laying groundwork, foreshadowing the fulfillment of this end-time Bible prophecy. And So let's get into some of these reports here. In this first piece, which also has links to many other reports from different news agencies linked up in it. So I'll link you up with that. And it's even got a live KTVA television broadcast on the matter linked up as well. But it talks about how following last year's massive die-off of Alaskan seabirds, scientists are still looking. The mainstream media will not report on it. However, I want to share with you a few things. I'll link you up to the reports in the description box below. But these are all recent reports that have come out. And, you know, we know that after the opening of the seventh seal in Revelation 8, verse 9, you know, it's prophesied that 1/3 of all sea life on earth dies. And Revelation 8:9 says, and then the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life